today's episode of the Locked On Texans podcast, how does T. Higgins getting franchise tag impact the Houston Texans and all of their offseason plans and DIY, do-it-yourself Houston, internal home improvements that can make 2025 much better.
You are Locked On Texans, your daily podcast on the Houston Texans. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Battle Red Nation, Bulls on Parade. Welcome to today's episode. We are your Texans football analysts and credentialed media members. I'm John Hickman. That's Brian, Big Sarge Badfield, holding it down for H-Town. Big smile, big hat, Big Sarge. Thank y'all for making us the first listen of the day and for being a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On today's show, we will dive into why the Houston Texans can do it themselves. Brought over some new coaches. Cole Popovich is now the head man in charge over the offensive line. Do they need to spend capital outside to maybe fix what they can do with the tools that they have inside their home? Make it make sense. We finally dive into some free agent talk. Sarge has something he wants to say, and I'll respond the only way I can. But we start off today's show looking at T. Higgins getting franchise tagged and ultimately just talking about how does that impact the Houston Texans. Big Sarge.
What's going on, Mr. Hickman? Greetings and salutations.
I'm going to give a big Sarge salute. So T. Higgins gets franchise tagged by the Cincinnati Bengals.
Yep.
And you would think, why y'all talking about that? That has nothing to do with the Houston Texans down soft. It's cold up there, and we are about to go into the summertime. So you know it's going to be pretty out here. But as pretty as it's going to be, Houston ain't got a lot of money. And some of those players, they may want to come to Houston. They may can't afford them. They may love the city, but they can't stay. The Houston Texans have talked about, we talked about it on Monday's show, all last week, they want to bring Stefon Diggs back.
Yep.
Now, we can look at T. Higgins getting franchise tag. He'll make $26 million on a franchise tag this year. I think, Sarge, we should open up this conversation by really understanding that because of the cap space limitations Houston has right now, they're going to do everything that they can to create space. They want Stefon Diggs back at the right price, though Nick Caserio, if we talked about it here on the show, told by a source, he is going to really put an emphasis on development of players. That's the best way that they can kind of keep that cap space low until 2026. Higgins staying in Cincinnati does force other teams around the league to say who's the next best guy. And Stefon Diggs, even though he's coming off an ACL injury, could be that person.
Yes, John, and that's exactly what I look at is that with the Cincinnati Bengals franchise tag and T. Higgins, and like you said, there are a lot of teams that could use wide receivers. There's a lot of teams that were sitting back watching and seeing what the Cincinnati Bengals were going to do with T. Higgins. And the next best thing, especially, I've been harping on, and, the fans and Battle Red Nation in the YouTube comments has let me know their feelings on Deebo Samuel. And so him going from the 49ers over to the Commanders, now that takes just a serviceable wide receiver off the market. And now San Francisco may be looking to replace Deebo Samuel, and they may not want to do that in the draft. Maybe they're looking at a player like Stefon Diggs, and I don't know how much they're willing to pay him, especially knowing that they have to sign Brock Purdy. But, now Stefon Diggs can come on their radar now that T. Higgins is not on there anymore because he has franchise tag. You look at a team like the Dallas Cowboys, who definitely needs wide receiver help. They got CD Lamb, and then on the other side, you got, players like Brandon Cooks, who's getting older.
Also a free agent.
Yes. And you have, and with Stefon Diggs, maybe wanting to play with his brother up in Dallas. Now he pops on that radar because of T. Higgins. He becomes his stock rose on Monday with the Cincinnati Bengals franchise tagging T. Higgins. But here's the thing, John. This is where it may work out for the Houston Texans, because the one thing that's going to hurt the Cincinnati Bengals is they franchise tag T. Higgins, are they going to give him a long? Because I think this is the last. They franchise tagged him last season, correct? I think
So
you
they
know
can't do it again.
you can't do it again. You're either going to give him a long-term contract, or you're either going to trade him, or you're going to let him hit the free agent market. The problem that the Cincinnati Bengals have is you got to pay T. Higgins, you got to pay Jamar Chase, and you got to pay Trey Hendrickson, who's on the defensive side of the ball, and if I'm not mistaken, led the league in sacks this past season. So, you got 3 players on that team who want to get paid. You really only can afford to keep 2, unless you're just going to be cash strapped and cap spaced out, and you're not going to be able to fill any other needs on the team because your money's going to be tied into Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and Trey Hendrickson. So where it works out for the Houston Texans is if T. Higgins doesn't get traded, if he doesn't get traded throughout the season, now you come into 2026 and now he becomes available. Who's one of T. Higgins' best friend? Joe Mixon. Who the T. Higgins is already playing with a very good quarterback in Joe Burrow. You insert him into and make him the number 2 wide receiver on the Houston Texans. The Texans will have more cap space available to maybe give him a long-term contract, what he's seeking, what he's seeking and what he's worth. And that's where it could T. Higgins being franchise tag could help the Houston Texans.
No, absolutely. And when we look at the market right now, I mean, you put Stefon Diggs up against guys like a Keenan Allen, Amari Cooper, who I don't know how people around the league feel about Amari Cooper at this stage in his career. Chris Godwin coming off in the injury. Brandon Cooks, as we just mentioned, he's also going to be a free agent. DeAndre Hopkins, Mike Williams, Robert Woods, Marquise Brown, Darius Slayton, KJ Osborne. Not necessarily a free agent class for the wide receiver group that just pops out names. Stefon probably has the bigger name between him and DeAndre Hopkins. We just recently saw DeAndre Hopkins. He is not D-Hop anymore. He is officially DeAndre Hopkins.
Yes.
Had an amazing career, so let me not make fun of him. One of the Houston Texans' best players in their franchise history. Diggs was also a guy before the injury. I mean, you can tell he still has something in the tank.
Yeah.
Worries is after the injury was there, he also has some legal issues going on. Does that scare a team away or not? But he is definitely now pushed up the ranks. And to your point, what does Cincinnati do? Hey, we've seen histories of teams franchise tagging players and then trading them. Here in Houston, Jadeveon Clowney, right?
Yeah.
Yannick Ngakoue, D Ford, Frank Clark. So it is not necessarily out of the thought. The idea could still be there for Cincinnati. Let's go ahead and franchise tag them for the safety of our organization, but we may still move on from them if the right deal is there. And I don't know if Houston could throw their name in that hat and afford the $26 million along with trading for him and giving up pieces. But boy, how
Stefon
scary
Diggs
would it
got
be?
holds all the cards right now, John.
He does, and this is a player that Houston really does want back. What we've been told. Nico and T. Higgins would be scary on the outside.
Oh my God.
I just want to say that.
John, that. Hey, listen, that will put C.J. Stroud back into his Ohio State days. Oh,
it
my
absolutely
goodness.
would. Just throw it up there to some guys that can go get it. But I do think the importance of this conversation is where Houston is right now.
Yeah.
How can I put it? As other teams are kind of forced to look at other areas, other receivers for their needs, it also forces Houston to say, are we going to bring him back, and Stefon Diggs back or not? And the decision needs to be made sooner than later. Now, how I feel about the situation, I think it would probably make more sense to say, let's see if we can just stay young and give ourselves some flexibility for the next couple of years. Because for Houston, what I don't think they will want to do, and we'll get into that maybe a little bit in the second segment, they don't want to go into 2026 kind of cuffed down with that free agent class, right? And I think that that's a much better class. This year's class has some good guys in it. We'll dive into it, but are you going to roll with Stefon, or are you going to just say we're going to let bygones be bygones and we're going to move in different directions? So I
No.
can't wait to see how Houston handles that situation. And that's one of those challenges for Nick Caserio that I'm not going to say will make or break an offseason, but it will heavily determine how Houston can go about making moves this offseason.
And real quickly, John, that's why in this draft, you have to see what the Houston Texans are going to do, because we're looking at them at number 25 right now. And, we say, hey, they could trade back and maybe get some wide receivers. But John, with the way that Matthew Golden's name is shooting up the ranks as far as mock drafts are concerned, and some people had him starting out at number 25 or, in the late 20s, middle to late 20s. Now his stock is shooting up to like in the teens. And so do Houston shoot up to try to get him, trade up to try to get him? But if they are able to get Matthew Golden, then it makes the whole point mute. You don't need T. Higgins after that if you got Matthew Golden, because like you said, it does that. And real quickly, John, before you say this, before we close out this segment, hey, does DeAndre Hopkins get his number retired? We'll talk about that later on.
I think he should. I'm gonna follow that point up, what you said about Matthew Golden in the second half of this show. So we got more Locked On Texans. When the game tips off, like the Houston Rockets right now as they take on OKC, the action is getting started, and there's no better place to get in on that action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you missed the opening tip-off or you want to get in on that fourth quarter comeback action, you can stay in on the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. That's what all the rave is about right now. So one thing about FanDuel, guys, ain't no waiting around, right? You make your money, you win big, you get your money, you get paid instantly. The app is easy to use. I've come across different apps that are confusing and glitchy. You won't have that issue with FanDuel. So easy to navigate, easy to use, get paid instantly. And also they're hooking up, all of their new customers with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Welcome back in, Locked On Texans listeners and viewers, to the Matthew Golden point. I have been told the Houston Texans are currently high on two players. Two players we've talked about here on the show. Matthew Golden is one of them, and Tyler Booker. Golden had a great combine over the weekend. We all saw it. And I also think what makes him favorable for the Houston Texans and why the inside guys like him a lot, his speed will be perfect along Nico Collins, and you'll be able to do a lot of different things from a schematic standpoint. Athleticism is also something that I think Nick Caley coming in for his first year without having Tank Dell, with the uncertainty of Stefon Diggs, he would love to have a player, offensive weapon like Matthew Golden, and he also has great hands. Booker's response to how he handles stunts, among other things, really set him apart and really blew away the Texans front office. So I wonder how they're going to go about 25. And just play around with the thought, because 2 years ago we saw them trade up for Will Anderson after they just drafted CJ Stroud. Could they do it again? Could they do it again, Sarge?
Yeah, John, they do it
again?
There is no CJ Stroud or Will Anderson Jr. in this draft.
There's not. No, there's not. But could they say, we like both of these guys? Booker would be an immediate upgrade at right guard or left guard. You figure that situation out, but more than likely right guard. Golden would be an immediate upgrade over the guys we have in this roster and will give us some relief in that room. Could they do it again? Am I reaching? I don't know.
I'm not giving up future draft capital for Matthew Golden and Booker. I'm not for Golden and Booker. I'm not doing that. Now for Golden, I would. For Booker, I don't know, because how high Booker won't be around for in the 20s. He won't make it to number.
I think he will.
I honestly and truly, like, I'm, for one, I mock draft out and we still got a whole another month left. But I honestly don't think, and I'm gonna tell you why I don't think he's gonna make it to the Texans. I don't think the Texans would have to jump up to get Matthew Golden, and the Texans would have to jump up to get Tyler Booker. And the reason why I say that is because both of them are going to show out on their pro days.
Yeah, you're
Booker,
right about that.
Booker is going to blow everybody away at the Alabama Pro Day. And so this talk about him coming out of the NFL scouting combine and what he did there, that don't matter, John. When they get to see him one-on-one in Alabama, they're gonna be like, nah, he a dog.
And those T-shirt Olympics don't really matter when you can put on the tape and watch. If you're the Texans, really quick before we go to the free agent talk, would you rather go Booker or Matthew Golden if both of those players are available at 25?
I'm going Golden. You got to go Golden. They need a number 2 wide receiver.
Yeah, they absolutely do. They absolutely do. Now, Houston could look to bring in free agents this offseason. They'll absolutely look to bring in free agents this offseason once they create space. We got to look at who's on the market that will give Houston value at the positions of need without breaking the bank. Sarge, I think a position of need that we necessarily haven't talked about is safety. And again, a lot of these decisions are based on what happens with Stefon Diggs and also how Nick Caserio goes about creating space, whether it may be cuts or restructuring of contracts. And so we'll sit back and wait to see how that process plays out. But Hufanga, an ex-49er, he already said he ain't going back. And I don't want this team to be labeled as the Patriot 49er South. But you look at the type of player that he is, the relationship that he's had with the DeMeco Ryans, and also he would be a player that I think would be very inexpensive for the Houston Texans, could come in and feel an immediate need. What does Houston do with Jimmy Ward, right? Are they going to look to bring back Eric Murray? I don't think they can afford to bring back both of those guys and lean on them for majority of those snaps alongside Kalen Bullock. And I also think it would be very wise to partner Bullock with another young up-and-coming safety that can play some damn good football. His projected cap hit right now would be around $12.5 million on a 2-year deal. Maybe Houston could look to maybe stretch that out to 3 to give themselves some leverage long-term. And the safety market right now, based on Antoine Winfield, his contract, $21 million a year, $21.5 million. So he's going to be well off from that. You're not going to have to worry about reaching that number. He'd be a good addition to a team that I think we've overlooked the safety need and undervalued how important it is for this franchise.
John, say that name one more time.
Forgive me, I cannot pronounce his first name right now, but his last name Hufanga.
And the only reason I wanted you to say it one more time because it almost sounds like Mufasa. Ooh, say it again. Mufasa. Ooh, we know who Mufasa was, If anybody, I'm sorry, that's a Lion King reference. I know everybody should have seen Lion King by now. I hope I didn't spoil it for you. But John, the reason why I had you say that name again also is because it's one of the players that DeMeco likes. That's one of the players that DeMeco helped develop. That's one of the players that knows DeMeco's defensive system like the back of his hand. That's one of the players that you can bring in and you have link him back up with his former teammate Azeez Al-Shaair. So now you already got the defensive line taken care of. You got Azeez being the quarterback of that defense at that middle linebacker position. And then you also got that safety help up top, someone who could also help Kalen Bullock in his second year, help him develop a little bit more. And John, I mean, if you can get Jimmy Ward back at a reasonable rate, I'm keeping him around. And the reason why I'm keeping him around is because Jimmy has gotten a little long in the tooth to be able to play the safety position. But you put him and Jalen Petrie at that nickel position, you got another linebacker because they both play with their hair on fire. They're both not afraid of contact. They both seek contact. And if you got the type of help that you already got two star-studded cornerbacks, so you got that locked down. And if you put Mofonga back there at safety, and you got Kalen Bullock, who's a ball hawk, that could help out that nickel corner position, because we know Jalen Petrie nor Jimmy Ward are strong in coverage. But I like that, John. I like that, because it's almost like insert player here. You don't have to teach him nothing.
Right.
Only thing you have to teach him is how to play with the rest of the players. And if you look at it, it isn't like he is going to somewhere. I mean, he's going to unfamiliar territory. Look at the defense that the 49ers had, and look at the way that they were built and that they're set up. All he's doing is coming in to another version of the 49ers, except this one is defense a little bit better.
And I also want to add to that the importance of getting him on a fairly inexpensive deal, right? He'll be a guy that can come in, has 7 interceptions in the last 3 seasons, hadn't given up a lot of yak yards, hadn't given up a lot of yards altogether, missed games last year. So that could ultimately play in the favor of the Houston Texans in terms of how teams may view him right now this offseason. But he'd be a guy that I think could come in and, again, plug and play player, understands the defense, and in a sense would be going into year 3 and 4 under that defense because he's already spent time with DeMeco Ryans. So I think that'll be a very good upgrade. It's all about looking at players' positions where if you're not comfortable with investing in the best of the best in those positions through the draft, then maybe you go ahead and create that space for some of the best young talent already in the NFL. And I think familiarity plays in favor of the Houston Texans. 2 more players that I think would make sense for the Houston Texans. And this conversation is all about making it make sense. They don't have the money that they had last year, so they have to be very strategic with how they go about bringing in some of these free agents. Again, another 49er. I'm not trying to turn it to the 49er South Patriots, but guard Aaron Banks, projected contract, 3 years, $25 million. He would be able to come in and fill that right guard position. And Mekhi Becton, 4 years, $40 million, still young, play some good guard for the Philadelphia Eagles, but would get him on a $10 million a year type of deal, which would give Houston some flexibility at right guard. And that's a big body. He's a free agent. Only signed a 1-year deal with Philly. He's a big body, 6'6", 6'7", and that will give CJ some damn good protection up front, and some good running, running block as well. If they don't choose to go Tyler Booker.
So what he did, John, was him and Braun, Zach, him and Zach Braun, they went and they said, okay, we'll take a 1-year deal, 1-year prove-it deal. And now coming off that 1-year prove-it deal, now they're going to get paid. Do you think the Houston Texans can afford him now? This is the offensive lineman who played for the New York Jets and then went to the Eagles, correct?
Yes. So again, his projected contract right now is around $10 million. For the other guard and Aaron Banks, his projected contract is around $8.5 million a year.
So you cutting Shaq?
Absolutely. There is no universe. We've talked about this before. If Cole Popovich can come in and get the best out of him, I think if there's any position or any player that Houston said, we absolutely thank you for your services, but we have to upgrade and move on from, Shaq Mason is on their list.
Was they cut by cutting him, making him a post June 1st? They save how much money?
I think $9.5 million or something along those lines.
Save that amount of money, and then I guess that you can make it work. You can make it work with him coming in, if you get rid of Shaq Mason. So
yeah,
I can see that.
And that's just one guy you move on from or restructure.
Yeah,
they'll have a couple of guys that they have to figure that out with, but it's all about not only making it make sense financially, but making it make sense for a roster spot.
Real quickly before we close this segment out, which one of those guys do you like the best?
It's a tough question, and I don't know if I can answer that right now. I will say I do like the size of a former tackle who was a mammoth moving inside. And he gave up a few sacks last year, but I like his value as a run blocker. And I also like some of the things that he could do. And then with Cole Popovich, I think he and Philly may have the best offensive line coach in the league. So
Yeah.
He played a huge role in Philly and Saquon being able to run their way to the Super Bowl. I do like the idea of Mekhi Becton.
Yeah. I like,
You know,
you know what, John? I just, I mean, with the size, I mean, he can move mountains, and you put him and because Blake Fisher's not a small guy himself.
no, Blake Fisher is 6'6", 6'7", and I was called crazy when I suggested, hey, maybe this guy's could be a great guard in the league when they first drafted him.
So you put Becton next to right next to Blake Fisher. That is a very good tandem and a very good. I feel like they could open up some holes open up some holes for Joe Mixon and John. That's the perfect balance that they would need, because if you can get that run blocking on the right side, and you can get that pass protection to protect CJ's blind side on that left side with some, with some good good run blocking as well. Yeah, John, you may see this offense turn itself around if Nick Caley is who they say he is or who he's projected to be.
Absolutely, and remember, a lot of guys in that room said, "Hey, we like Cole Popovich. Keep him." When we come back, DIY Sarge. How
Yeah.
can Houston fix their problems internally? More Locked On Texans.
Welcome back to the Locked On Texans podcast. Thank you for making us your first listen of the day. John, you know what, one thing, real quickly, one thing I realized, I call your name a lot. I don't know why, I just do. John, DIY, do it yourself. Internal home improvements. And what I mean by that is I feel like this is what Nick Caserio should have in his hands at all times. From this point on, from this day forward, I want Nick Caserio to walk around with a drill, a hammer, a screwdriver, a tack hammer. Hey, look.
Flathead.
Hey, look, if you got somebody who can walk around with a chainsaw, then it is not out of the question for Nick Caserio to walk around with the drill. And the reason why I say that he should walk around with the drill, John, is because we just got through talking about free agency and what the Houston Texans could potentially look at bringing in on the offensive line. And I'm going to say it like this, John. I look at it as, I think the Houston Texans can fix their own problems. I think that they can fix their own problems on that offensive line. And the reason why I say that is that unit that ended out the regular season from week 16 to the Kansas City Chiefs game, the divisional round. So from week 16 against the Kansas City Chiefs until the divisional round playoff game of the Kansas City Chiefs, that offensive line didn't do too bad, John. They only gave up, and starting that week, they only gave up 8 sacks. They gave up 8 sacks to end the season. They gave up that amount in the divisional round. We'll talk about that in a little bit later on. They didn't give up. And then you go into the 3 sacks against the Los Angeles Chargers. And so I look at it like this, John. I look at it like that Nick Caserio could take this and say, okay, so right tackle, Blake Fisher, right guard, Juice Scruggs, center, Jared Patterson, left guard, Titus Howard, left tackle, Laramie Tunsil. Let's start out with that unit this season. Let's start out with that unit. And then you have a Kenyon Green as a backup, because you're going to need depth, because somebody's going to sustain an injury. Knock on wood, I don't want that to happen. But you bring in a Kenyon Green, you keep him around at least for one more year as a backup, not as a starter, as a backup, right? And if you're not going to cut Shaq Mason, you keep Shaq Mason around as a backup. Then you go in, and if you can't get Tyler Booker, right off the rip, you go in and you draft some offensive linemen in the later rounds for depth. Because if you look at from Jared Patterson, Juice Scruggs, and Blake Fisher, that right side of the line, starting from the center to the right side, that's all youth right there, John. And all those guys can grow together. They can grow together, be a staple for that line. And then you got to look to maybe replace a Laramie Tunsil in the future, or a Titus Howard in the future. Or if you're going to draft a left guard, you can if Titus if Laramie moves on, then you could just move Titus out to the left tackle position. And so I think that internally, and especially with the amount of free agent offensive linemen that will probably be available in 2026, when the Houston Texans will have more money, something that we keep harping on. I feel like that if they can sustain that, and here's the most important part, though, John. The most important part of everything that I just said, the most important part of the DIY, the DIY project for Nick Caserio, if you're going to do it this way, no such thing as off time during training camp. Everybody practices.
Yeah.
Everybody practices from day one.
Yeah.
Laramie, I understand that you're dealing with injuries. Titus, I understand you deal with some injuries. Cool. Everybody practices, and so they can be on the same page, so there won't be no excuses going into the regular season.
You know what I want to look at before we close out. And by the way, I do wonder if Kenyon Green has any trade value. Not sure if he does, but maybe with a weak offensive guard class, maybe they can find some value. But I want to look at it from a standpoint of a lot of times, Sarge, either you come on this show, I've come on this show, we've had conversation behind the scenes, or we're talking with DJ, we're talking to Jonathan Alexander, we're talking with Cole, we're talking with different people, and we're coming away with conversations that may have been had from a player or maybe someone on the coaching staff. And a lot of the times with the offensive line, it was a teaching issue. A lot of the times with the wide receivers, it was a conceptual issue. And so I do think you would get an immediate boost by having guys on the same page.
Yeah.
Nick Caley, Ben McDaniels, whatever his role would be, Jerry Saplinski, Cole Popovich, and I'm missing another offensive assistant. Danny Barrett, but I mean Danny Barrett, but also the other offensive assistant that they added. If you get that coaching staff on the same page,
Pat Riley,
and I think it was another one too. They added a couple of guys we talked about a couple of weeks ago. You get everybody on the same page in terms of what the offense should look like and everybody doing their job and what their job and their role should be. Then I think the immediate thought is we'll clean up some of those bad things from last year. We'll clean up some of that bad communication between the inside and outside. Even Nick Haley's press conference, what he said, it all starts inside out.
Yeah.
And Houston had one of the worst guard duos all last year. So it'll start with the communication and getting those guys better inside and spreading out. And I think what plays into Houston's favor, you got a guy outside that's been in the league for a very long time, a damn good tackle on Laramie Tunsil. Don't know what they're going to do with Titus Howard moving forward. Will he stay a left guard? Will they move him back over? The conversation is he'll stay where he is and Blake Fisher will grow because obviously he's the future. But you'll still clean up some of those bad habits from last year. And from a receiver standpoint, you clean up from, okay, we're going to make y'all jobs a little bit easier because of how things will run from an offensive standpoint, from a play caller standpoint, and from a receiver standpoint. So the DIY immediately has already started by getting guys that are competent in their job, knows what the players can do and knows what they can do well, knows what they need to work on. And I believe the process of getting them coached up and getting them better has already started.
And one of the reasons why I chose the offensive line is because that's one of the units that they're the fixer upper. They are the, we buy ugly homes and then we fix them up and turn them around. That is exactly what they need. And John, before we end this show, I will say this. One of the main problems that the Texans offensive line had last year was communication. John, sometimes the call will come in, or sometimes they make the call, they get to the line, and then even when they start calling out some things, the right side get one call, the left side don't get the call. Or the left side hears the call and the right side doesn't hear the call. And now you got so many people doing so many things. I'm going to give you a really quick example. In the Kansas City game, in the Kansas City game, there was a sack, and I think that sack may have been given up by Shaq Mason, if I'm not mistaken. And it looks like Shaq Mason got beat pretty bad. And I'm not saying that Shaq Mason, I'm not saying that Shaq Mason didn't just get beat. I'm not going to say that. But what I will say is this, and what I was told right after the game was Shaq didn't get the call. And Shaq didn't get the offensive call, so he's automatically thinking what they're already on, and they get to the line and it changes. He doesn't get the call, and so he's doing one thing while everybody else is doing another, and that happened a lot throughout the season, which is one of the reasons why you've seen a lot of delayed blitzes and the stunts work on the Houston Texans.
Absolutely. We've talked about it since week 2. And also playing with better tempo gives your offensive line and your quarterback more room, more opportunity to change plays if needed.
Yeah.
Thank y'all for listening to today's episode. We really appreciate it. Follow us on Twitter at Locked On Texans. Subscribe, like, and comment to the Locked On Texan podcast on YouTube, and follow me on Twitter at John_Hickman12.
And you can follow me on the app formerly known as Twitter at Big Star Sports with the Z at the end.
Until next time, ladies and gents, and Bulls on Parade around the world. Peace.